What I'm about to tell you is the reason I'll never work a night shift again. These are 3 stories submitted by viewers who experienced truly horrifying events during their overnight work hours. Each of these accounts made me question why anyone would choose to work alone in the dark hours when the world feels like a completely different place. If you have your own night shift horror story to share, please email me. But I have to warn you, after hearing these 3 stories, you might want to reconsider that overnight job offer. This story was sent to me by someone we'll call Marcus. Marcus worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store in a small town off a major interstate. The location was perfect for catching truckers and late-night travelers, but it also meant long stretches of complete isolation. Marcus had been working there for about 8 months when things started getting weird. It began with a customer, an older man who would come in around 3 a.m. every few nights. The man never bought anything significant, just a coffee and maybe some gum. But he would linger. He'd walk the aisles slowly, picking up items and putting them back, all while stealing glances at Marcus behind the counter. What made Marcus uncomfortable wasn't just the staring. It was how the man seemed to know things. He'd make comments about Marcus's schedule, asking if he worked every Tuesday night, or mentioning that Marcus's car looked like it needed new tires. Marcus had never told this stranger anything personal, yet somehow the man knew details about his life. One particularly quiet night, around 2:30 a.m., Marcus was restocking cigarettes behind the counter when he heard the familiar chime of the front door. He looked up expecting to see the usual trucker or insomniac, but the store appeared empty. The door had clearly opened, he'd heard it and seen the motion sensor light activate. But no one was there. Marcus walked around the counter to check the aisles. Every row was empty. He checked the bathroom, the storage area, even looked outside the front windows. Nothing. As he walked back to the counter, confused and slightly unnerved, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was a fresh cup of coffee sitting on the counter. Not just any coffee. It was prepared exactly the way the strange man always made it, black with 3 sugars. Marcus was certain it hadn't been there moments before. The next night, Marcus mentioned the incident to his manager during the shift change. His manager's face went pale. He told Marcus about the previous night shift worker, someone named David who had quit suddenly about a year ago. David had complained about a customer who made him uncomfortable, an older man who seemed to know too much about his personal life. What the manager hadn't told Marcus was why David really quit. On David's last night, the man had approached the counter and calmly told him that he knew where David lived, what time he got off work, and that he'd been watching David's apartment. David walked out that night and never came back. Marcus thought about quitting right then, but he needed the job. He decided to install a small camera behind the counter, positioning it to capture anyone who entered the store. For the next week, everything seemed normal. The strange man didn't appear, and Marcus started to think maybe the guy had moved on. Then, one night around 3:15 a.m., Marcus was reviewing footage from the camera when he noticed something impossible. On the recording from 2 hours earlier, he could clearly see himself working behind the counter. But there, standing perfectly still in aisle 3, partially hidden behind a display of chips, was the man. He was just standing there, motionless, staring directly at the camera. Marcus immediately turned to look at aisle 3. It was empty. He rewound the footage. There was the man, clear as day, standing in the exact spot Marcus was now looking at. The timestamp showed this was happening in real time, but the aisle was completely empty to the naked eye. Marcus quit that night. He left the store unlocked, called his manager, and told him he was done. When asked to explain, all Marcus could say was that some jobs aren't worth the money, no matter how desperately you need it. The convenience store closed permanently 3 months later. Local rumors suggest they couldn't keep anyone working the night shift. This next story comes from someone we'll call Sarah, who worked as a night custodian at a large regional hospital. Sarah's job involved cleaning and maintenance throughout the building, but her primary responsibility was the basement level where old medical equipment was stored. The basement was a maze of corridors lined with rooms full of outdated machinery, discontinued furniture, and archived patient files. Most of the lighting down there was motion-activated to save energy, which meant Sarah often worked in sections of complete darkness until she entered a new area. Sarah had been working this job for almost 2 years without incident. She was comfortable with the solitude and actually preferred the quiet basement to the chaos of the upper floors. That changed one night in October when she heard the elevator. It was around 1 a.m. when Sarah heard the distinctive ding of the basement elevator arriving. This was unusual because the basement level was restricted after midnight. Only Sarah and security had access, and security rarely came down unless there was a specific reason. Sarah walked toward the elevator area to investigate. As she approached, she could hear the doors opening and closing repeatedly, as if someone was holding down the button. When she turned the corner, she found the elevator doors opening and closing rhythmically, but no one was inside. Sarah pressed the call button to stop the cycle. The doors closed one final time, and the elevator returned to the ground floor. She made a mental note to report the malfunction in the morning and went back to work. An hour later, it happened again. The same rhythmic opening and closing, but this time Sarah also heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the basement corridors, but not from the direction of the elevator. The sound was coming from deeper in the basement, from sections that Sarah hadn't been working in. Following the sound would mean walking through several darkened corridors into areas that rarely got cleaned. Against her better judgment, Sarah decided to investigate. She grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight and began walking toward the source of the footsteps. The basement layout was confusing even in daylight, but at night, with only emergency lighting and her flashlight, it felt like a completely different place. The footsteps seemed to stay just ahead of her, always around the next corner or through the next doorway. After about 10 minutes of following the sound, Sarah reached a section of the basement she'd only been to a few times: the old morgue area. The hospital had built a new morgue facility years ago, but this section remained, with its original refrigeration units and examination tables still in place. The footsteps stopped. Sarah stood in the doorway, shining her flashlight into the abandoned morgue, and that's when she saw them. Wet footprints on the floor. Fresh wet footprints leading from the entrance to one of the old refrigeration units. The footprints were clearly human, size 10 or 11 shoes, and they were dripping wet as if someone had just walked through standing water. But there was no water anywhere in the basement. The area was completely dry. Sarah followed the footprints with her flashlight beam. They led directly to refrigeration unit number 7, and then they stopped. No footprints leading away. No indication that whoever made them had left the area. The prints just ended at the refrigerator door. That's when Sarah noticed the door was slightly ajar. These units had been sealed for years, but number 7 was cracked open about an inch. Cold air was seeping out, carrying with it a smell that Sarah couldn't identify, something between disinfectant and decay. Sarah knew she should leave. Every instinct told her to turn around and go back upstairs, but something compelled her to approach the unit. As she got closer, she could hear something from inside, a sound like dripping water, slow and steady. She reached for the door handle, and that's when she heard breathing. Slow, labored breathing coming from inside the refrigeration unit. Sarah stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. The light rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows on the walls before coming to rest, pointing directly at unit number 7. In that moment, Sarah saw the door slowly swing open. The breathing grew louder, more distinct, and she could swear she heard something moving inside the unit. Without waiting to see what emerged, Sarah ran. She didn't stop running until she reached the elevator. She pressed the button frantically, and when the doors opened, she rushed inside and hit the button for the ground floor. As the elevator rose, she could hear echoing through the basement below the sound of multiple footsteps, as if several people were now walking through the corridors she'd just fled. Sarah quit the next morning. When her supervisor asked why, she simply said the basement wasn't safe for night work. Her supervisor seemed to understand more than Sarah expected. Apparently, Sarah wasn't the first night custodian to quit suddenly after working in the basement. The hospital administration eventually moved all basement cleaning duties to the day shift. Officially, this was for efficiency purposes, but staff members whisper that the basement level is no longer considered safe for solitary night work. The final story comes from someone we'll call James, who worked as a security guard at a large industrial warehouse complex. James was responsible for patrolling 3 connected buildings throughout the night, checking locks, monitoring alarm systems, and ensuring no unauthorized personnel entered the property. The complex was located in an area that had once been a thriving industrial district, but had largely been abandoned as businesses moved elsewhere. James's warehouse was one of only a few still operating in the area, surrounded by empty lots and derelict buildings. James had been working this position for 6 months and had developed a routine. He'd start his rounds at 11 p.m., do a complete sweep of all 3 buildings, then settle into the security office to monitor cameras until 3 a.m., when he'd do another full patrol. The buildings were used primarily for storing automotive parts, so they were filled with tall shelving units creating narrow aisles that stretched for hundreds of feet. The lighting was minimal, just enough to navigate safely but not enough to eliminate the deep shadows between the storage units. One night in late November, James was conducting his 3 a.m. patrol when he noticed something unusual in Building 2. As he walked down one of the main aisles, his flashlight beam caught movement at the far end. It looked like someone had quickly stepped behind one of the shelving units. James called out, identifying himself as security and asking if anyone was there. The warehouse fell silent. He approached the area where he'd seen the movement, but found nothing, just row after row of stored inventory. James completed his patrol but made a note to review the security cameras when he returned to the office. The camera system covered the main entrances and several key areas inside each building, but there were blind spots between the shelving units. Back in the security office, James reviewed the footage from Building 2. At exactly the time he'd seen the movement, the cameras showed him entering the building and beginning his patrol. But there, in the background of one camera angle, James could see something that made him rewind the footage several times. At the edge of the camera's range, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. It appeared to be a person standing perfectly still between 2 shelving units, watching James patrol. The figure was there for several minutes before moving out of the camera's view. James immediately called his supervisor to report a possible intruder. His supervisor advised him to continue his normal routine, but to call immediately if he saw anything else suspicious. The supervisor would review all the footage in the morning and determine if they needed to involve law enforcement. For the rest of the night, James stayed in the security office monitoring the cameras. He didn't see any more movement, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the building, staying just out of sight of the cameras. The next night, James arrived for his shift to find a note from his supervisor. The footage review had been inconclusive. While something was visible in the shadows, it wasn't clear enough to definitively identify as a person. The supervisor advised James to be extra vigilant and to call immediately if he encountered any intruders. James decided to modify his patrol routine. Instead of following predictable patterns, he would vary his timing and routes, hoping to catch any intruders off guard. On his 11 p.m. patrol, he entered Building 2 through the rear entrance instead of his usual front entrance approach. As he made his way through the warehouse, James noticed something that stopped him cold. There were footprints in the dust on the floor. Fresh footprints that led from the rear entrance deeper into the warehouse. James's own prints from previous nights were still visible, but these were different. Someone else had been walking through the building. James followed the footprints, which led him through several aisles before stopping at a section where inventory had been rearranged. Boxes had been moved to create a small hidden space behind one of the shelving units, almost like a makeshift camp. In this hidden area, James found clear evidence that someone had been staying in the warehouse. There was a sleeping bag, some food containers, and personal items. Most disturbing was a notebook filled with detailed observations about James's patrol schedule, his routines, and even personal details like what car he drove and what time he usually left in the morning. James immediately called his supervisor and then contacted the police. When officers arrived, they found the hidden area exactly as James described, but whoever had been staying there was gone. The notebook contained weeks of surveillance notes, suggesting someone had been living in the warehouse and watching James for an extended period. The investigation revealed that the intruder had been accessing the building through a weakness in the rear entrance security that wasn't visible from the cameras. They had been systematically studying James's routines, possibly planning something more serious than simple trespassing. James quit that night. The idea that someone had been watching him, learning his patterns, and potentially planning something harmful was too much to handle. The warehouse company hired a security firm with multiple guards and upgraded their entire security system. Local police later connected this incident to a series of break-ins and assaults targeting night shift workers in the area. The perpetrator was never caught, but the pattern of surveillance and escalation suggests James was wise to leave when he did. These 3 stories share a common thread: the vulnerability that comes with working alone during the night shift. Whether it's retail, healthcare, or security work, the isolation and darkness create opportunities for situations that would never happen during regular business hours. If you're currently working a night shift, please be extra cautious. Trust your instincts, report anything unusual, and remember that no job is worth risking your safety. The night shift might pay more, but as these stories demonstrate, sometimes the extra money comes with costs that no one should have to pay. If you have your own night shift horror story, feel free to email me. But after hearing these accounts, you might want to think twice about that overnight position you've been considering. Stay safe out there.